Africa Day 2012 at the London Business School. Africa, taking ownership, successes and challenges.
I'm delighted to see so many of you here today and to welcome back many alumni, many of whom I've had the pleasure of teaching over the years. Since the launch of Africa Day 11 years ago, this has become one of the leading conferences on our campus. And the caliber of the speakers today and the audience shows a real appetite for these topics. It's also a great testament, may I say, to the efforts of the students who have organized today's conference. So on your behalf, I would like to offer a very warm vote of thanks to those who have brought us all together today. Today's event is, of course, particularly special for us, as we have the honor of hosting His Excellency, the President of Gabon. The conference is about two things. It's about leadership and ownership, and it'll explore and celebrate the many ways in which the continent is taking ownership of its destiny, driving reforms, building capacity, and encouraging growth. Africa is a very special region for us at the London Business School, and I'd like, if I may, to spend just a little time telling you about how we are involved in the continent as a whole. We have around 900 alumni in the continent, with our largest communities in Nigeria and South Africa, where we also have very active alumni clubs. Many business schools claim to be global, despite having only a few international students in their classrooms. But we believe, and we're proud to be truly global. This year, of our students, they come from 106 countries, with 67 of our students coming from Africa across our degree programs. To put this into context, when I first joined the school, there were only 80 students for all the programs here at the London Business School. So we have almost as many from Africa as for the whole programs when I arrived. We're also very proud that Mo Ibrahim sits on our governing body. Mo is the founder of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and his remit is to support African leadership that improves the economic and social prospects of people in Africa. The Foundation generally supports an African student on our MBA program every year, and the school is also grateful to be able to offer a number of scholarships to our African students from the Alan and Nesta Ferguson Charitable Trust and our own Africa Scholarship Fund. It's very important to me and to all of us here to increase the number of scholarships so we can bring more people in from Africa. And indeed, many of our extraordinary students, including the one who introduced us today, would not perhaps have been able to study without the benefit of such awards. So I would like to thank anybody who's been involved in helping financially to bring people from African countries to the London Business School. We've also got a large number of participants from the regional open executive education programs, particularly the senior executive program. And in fact, from the one has just completed its program here at London Business School, the largest single contingent was indeed from an African country. Africa is also of great interest to my faculty colleagues. Two of them, Stephen MacDonald and Rajesh Chandy, are doing a major piece of work with the World Bank, Innovations Poverty Action at the University of Cape Town, and Business Bridge, a not-for-profit organization which offers a part-time business program in South Africa and Ghana. And Stephen and Rajesh, together with colleague Anya Lambrecht, are also working in Ghana with our alumnus Nanya Banton, who Nanya and her family run a microfinance business. And the seed funding for these projects, also interestingly, came from one of our major research institutes, the Deloitte Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Our Institute for Private Equity has delivered training in Tunisia and Nigeria for the African Venture Capital Association, and additional programs for individual venture capital and private equity funds were delivered in Ghana and Nigeria recently. Our students, we are delighted to be able to tell you, will in future be able, as part of their global business experience, one of these groups will be coming to one of the African countries to spend a week there as a group, and that's something which we have as an innovation coming in now. And I pay particular tribute to our Student-Led Africa Club, which is extremely active, maintaining links between us, student members, and alumni. It runs this annual conference and an Africa Trek each year, which mixes company visits in the region with social activity. Before I introduce His Excellency Ali Bongo Ondimba, I've got one more job to do. to thank, as I've done already, those responsible for today. It's such an important day in our calendar, and thank you very much all for taking time out of the weekend to come here. The fact that you're here is a tangible manifestation in your interest in the subject, so I very much hope you enjoy the day. It now gives me very great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, His Excellency Ali Bongo Ondimba, President of the Republic of Gabon.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for inviting me to deliver this opening speech today on a topic that I believe is at the heart of the debate about Africa's future. So let me start by asking each of you to think about why you're here today and what you hope to achieve and how you can contribute towards the concept of taking ownership. Through what lens do you look at Africa, and why today did you organize or choose to attend the Africa Day? What is your perception of Africa today?
The President talked about the perceptions of Africa and asked the audience how they interpret their continent and ultimately how they view themselves.
Poverty, tribal conflict and corruption? An Africa whose relationship with the world is anchored in pity, fed by images of round-bellied children with flies around their big eyes, the proliferation of which has fed the generous provision of aid to which the continent is perceived to be addicted.
He talked about taking ownership of one's destiny and the opportunities that lay ahead.
A continent that is emerging into its rightful position in the world with enormous potential, a continent whose time has come, leading global economic growth rates at an average about 4.5%, with the fastest growing middle income population in the world. A continent conceiving and leveraging technological innovations like mobile money transfer to deliver new areas of growth, while it remains home to most of the world's natural resources. A continent that has 17 nations ahead of India in the most recent East of Doing Business report. A continent consisting of 54 separate nations, one of which has the highest percentage of female representation in parliament in the world, at 56% in Rwanda. A continent that is now delivering on its economic potential to complement its long-held cultural and environmental wealth. This debate around the perception of Africa has been raging for many years, but it perhaps avoids a more fundamental question. How do we, as Africans, see our countries, our continent, and mostly ourselves? Do we spend too much of our time worrying about reacting to or trying to change the perceptions of others, while neglecting the need to fundamentally alter the reality of Africa? Do we hesitate to seize the opportunities that we are presented with today to build the we as Africans want, to take ownership of our future rather than relying on the actions of others? We will not change perceptions. Neither will we achieve our ambitions simply by seeking to tell nice stories. Perceptions are so difficult to change because they are exactly that, perceptions, not reality. We do not want to brand Africa. We want to change Africa. The change of perception will follow naturally. Most importantly, we need to influence the perception we have of ourselves. We need to instill the confidence to dream, to drive to plan to invest. The drive to plan to invest, the capacity and strength to be true to ourselves and believe that we can define our future, mindful of the challenges, but fully aware of the rewards. It is up to us to tell our own stories in our own way, to project the image of our continent that we know is right and true, to own our destiny. We need to sit confidently at the negotiation table, sure of our value proposition and of our strength, having learned from the past, taking into account the present, and able to be decisive about a vision for the future. The need for Africa to take ownership of our collective destiny has never been greater because the opportunities we have surpass those at any moment in the past. It is our responsibility to ensure that the policies and decisions that we implement today allow us to create a sustainable future for our continent. We do not want a short-term economic boom. We need to seize the opportunity to generate decades of progressive growth while maintaining social and environmental capital. As African leaders, this responsibility falls on our shoulders.
He went on to talk about an age of globalization and social media which opens the doors and raises greater awareness on a continent where 60% of the population is under the age of 30.
60% of this population has now access to mobile phones and therefore internet. In the age of social media and globalization, this creates a very vocal, informed population, eager to express its voice and determined to be given opportunities to imagine the world in which it wants to live. We as governments cannot offer them half-baked solutions. They will not accept them, and they will make sure their voice is heard. Alongside a young population, our middle classes are growing too, as well as their disposable income. By 2020, McKinsey projects that 52% of African households will have surplus income to spend. Africa will have more middle-class households than India very soon. Our populace is urbanizing too. 40% of the population now lives in cities, almost as urbanized as China. And today we have 52 cities with a population greater than 1 million, the same as Europe. By 2040, we may have the largest workforce in the world, 1.1 billion people, and one of the largest markets for consumer goods. These statistics present clear opportunities for industries, especially manufacturers and service industry companies. It also creates the need for a new approach to our land use and to the social contract we are proposing to our citizens, learning from the Arab Spring and the ongoing social issues in Europe driven by economic decline. About 60% of the world's virgin arable land is in Africa. Africa is home to the world's largest reserves of diamonds, bauxite, and cobalt. Africa produces 78% of world platinum and 57% of manganese. The exploitation of these resources offers great potentials to create employments for our people as well as for our countries. These are the resources the world needs today. So it is our responsibility to leverage on them in order to create value for all, while planning the spatial development of our countries in order to safeguard the harmony between man and nature. As the world is increasingly looking at Africa, at our resources, And as our children are now more than ever empowered to build our economies, it is crucially important that Africa takes her own destiny in hand. We have a unique opportunity to do so. And we need to be very conscious of the terms of the choice. So do we want to be forever beholden to others, struggling to catch up with no hope of ever achieving the independence that engenders self-respect? Or do we have the courage to define our own criteria of success, our own criteria of self-esteem? Do not misunderstand me. I do not adhere to the culture of blame that some use to project responsibilities on others and make excuses for Africa's performances.
Ali Bongo also touched on Gabon's potential and his hopes for its future.
I refer to the vast natural environment that our countries are blessed with and which form an intrinsic part of our cultural heritage and national identity. I have a natural disposition to this position because Gabon's environment is still pristine. 88% of my country is covered with rainforest, with incredible biodiversity. It is equally rich in mineral resources. Furthermore, my Bantu culture draws my appreciation of the intimate link between nature and mankind. You will understand, therefore, my dilemma. Should I pursue development and sacrifice the natural heritage and wealth of my country? Or do I believe that we can find a new way and achieve both? But let me reassure you. In fact, there is no dilemma in my mind. Gabon is resolutely charting our way forward, conceiving new approaches to the reconciliation of two seemingly opposite imperatives: environmental protection and social economic growth for our people. Indeed, we are inventing new ways of collaboration between the state and the private sector in order to do so. I'm not standing here in front of you as a representative of Africa. I'm only the elected president of Gabon, and so allow me to focus on what my country is doing and how we articulate and implement this new model of development. I was elected on the basis of my vision to build an emerging Gabon. Our national development strategy to attain emerging country status by 2025 assigns priority to conserving our natural environment while seeking to develop competitive manufacturing and service sector industries. Growth in these sectors will underpin our national low carbon development path and give practical life to our vision for an emerging Gabon. This is an ambitious objective, but we are realistic about our limitation as a government. We cannot achieve our vision for Gabon unless civil society and the private sector participate actively. My government will play its full part, but our contribution will amount to very little without the full participation of the private sector. So in order to attract investors, we need to build a clear investment case, a business plan sorts, for our country. By demonstrating a clear vision and a clear commitment to stick to this vision, we can reduce the perceived risk for our private sector partners and establish a clear win-win situation. In this respect, the role of the government is to guarantee the security, predictability of the business environment, whilst ensuring that the interests of its citizens are guaranteed and that sound environmental standards are applied. Hereby, government can and will become a real lever for change in the country. By playing its full role as partner, my government intends to give clear direction to our investors. By identifying, creating, and promoting opportunities for you to come and work with us to implement a new vision for harmonious growth.
The Q&A session raised the issues of trade between African countries, as well as the public and private sector investment view. And also this.
Your Excellency, I saw an interview last year regarding, you spoke very adamantly in regards to working within using the private sector within Gabon, but also education is a cornerstone of that. As we know, Your Excellency was educated in France, and I wanted to ask whether you would be educating the young Gabonese in regards to the English system or using the Francophone system, and what benefits of the two different structures, which would benefit the country most, and at which level would you educate the children so that we're able to work better within the private businesses?
Well, first, thank you for attending, this conference today. There's nothing for politicians more risky than to come wrong, young men and female, But I always welcome that opportunity to exchange. We in Africa have moved in different stages. In the 90s, it was important for us to reform our political system, because before that, most of us were under the one-party rule. And after 1990, we start changing political system to include multi-party and organized election, transparent. And so we really focused for that decade on elements of, implementing more democracy, good governance. And in most cases, that was done. It wasn't easy, but it was done in many cases. Then we felt the need to address the real problems around the economy. And that came at the time when we also decided to transform our continental organization. So we went from the OAU, Organization of African Unity, to AU, African Union. Why? Because we thought that the OAU mission was over. OAU main mission was to support independence move and make sure that on the whole of the continent, there would not be any more country that had not, able to access to independence. So after Nelson Mandela was freed from jail, we thought that OAU has completed its mission and that we had to move. So with the AU, we wanted to focus really on the main problem, which is to fight poverty, and for us to be able to deliver the aspiration of our people. And that's why new initiatives came about, like NEPAD, as I said, to really concentrate on building, strong economy for Africa, including sectors like infrastructure, energy, and others, agriculture, because, for feeding our people, of course, is a big problem. So food security. And we then decided to organize ourselves through regional organizations based more on the economy. and some are very, some regions are very strong, such as West Africa with ECOWAS, ECAS for Central Africa, SADC for Southern Africa. So the grouping is regional. And among each region, countries are trying to build a strong economy, making sure that we are going to study together how to improve infrastructure, work on our energy policy, and make sure that we can connect one another. So this is the phase we're going through right now. And we're also looking at connection between regions. But we're also trying to think about the future and to say that, well, regional structure is good, but we also have to think together regarding certain sectors.
So is response to English or French?
So today is completely irrelevant for a country to say, well, because I'm French speaking, I have to only to talk with France, to work with France, or because I'm English speaking, I have to look at UK. That is completely irrelevant today. Even in Europe, most countries are like in European Union. So it's a team effort, and we are stronger that way. And we have to focus today on problems that we foresee for the future. And that is why we have placed in Gabon the environment at the heart. We know, for instance, that by 2050, we might have big problems because of shortage of water due to climate change.
Well received by the audience, the President opened the way for other speakers to deliver their key messages. Acha Leke, director of McKinsey Company, set it off.
So the first message for me is that Africa is fundamentally changing, and the President spoke quite a bit about it today. If you look at the growth rates, and we spoke about the growth rates, we are now the second fastest growing region in the world, tied with the Middle East. What you don't see underlying this is that of the 30 companies that account for, say, 97% of the growth in Africa, all 30 grew in the last 10 years. So all 30 countries grew, and 25 of them accelerated the growth. So it's really a widespread phenomenon across the rest of the continent. If I try to bring this to life, and that's what I tell people, I live in Nigeria. Anybody from Nigeria? Okay, yeah, as usual. Right. About half the room, about half the room is from Nigeria. So I live in Lagos, right? Lagos, and in Lagos I live in an area called Banana Island, believe it or not. And it's probably one of the most upscale areas in Lagos. Now, on a good day, I get 4 hours of power from the grid. On a good day, right? On a bad day, I get nothing. Nigeria is a country, everybody talks about Boko Haram these days. I've personally had to evacuate Abuja 3 times. Half of our work is in Abuja. So in the last year, I've had to evacuate my teams out of Abuja 3 times. At the beginning of the year, I could not fly back to Nigeria because of the fuel subsidy crisis that was happening. There were strikes, and they blocked the airport. From South Africa, I had to fly to Frankfurt and then fly down to Abuja. There was a banking crisis 3 years ago where a number of CEOs were fired, and the central bank and the government took over some of the banks. I'm saying all this because despite all of that, in the last 10 years, Nigeria has grown at 7 to 8% on average, despite all of that, right? And it's a big economy, right? It's not a small economy that's sort of easy to grow. And if you start to dissect what's really underlying that growth is what we try to do in our Lands on the Move report, which I'm sure all of you have read. But I won't go into the details here, but there are a number of factors driving the growth, right? So the commodities is one big factor, but it only accounts for about 1/3 of the growth, the commodity boom in Africa. And 2/3 of the growth come from a bunch of different factors unrelated to that. So things around what the President was talking about this morning, macro and microeconomic stability, things around microeconomic reforms. He has a big program of reforms he's driving in Gabon. We're actually supporting him on one of the big special economic zones he's building there with one of the private sector companies. The urbanization, which is a massive trend across Africa today. Actually, when we did the report, prior to that, people were not really talking about urbanization. They spoke about it in India and in China, but not really about Africa. But Africa is more urbanized than India today, and we're almost as urbanized, actually more than China, almost as urbanized as India. And then the consumer revolution, right? 300 million Africans in the middle class and growing, like he mentioned. So there are a number of trends that point to the fact that things are fundamentally changing in Africa. And that is, the first message I'd like to leave you with.
He also highlighted the possible returns on investment through doing business in Africa and the challenges associated with it.
Now, the second message is that Africa offers very attractive returns. Or I'd like to say in the layman's term, you can make a lot of money in Africa, right? When I was thinking about moving back, and this was in the early 2000s from the US, the discourse at the time was, first half of the people, well, most people told me I shouldn't. I was mad. Actually, my parents didn't think I should move back. But the few who thought I should, it was more of a, we need to go back, we need to transform our continent, is the right thing to do. You're going to sacrifice yourself, but please do that for us. But today it's very different, right? People are coming back to do good, right? And we know that, but also to do well, right? And many do very, very well. If you look at the facts, Africa today offers the second highest return on investment of any emerging market region in the world. I always say the chart looked better when we stopped it at 2008, when we offered the highest return, but now, with 2 more years. But it is the second highest return on investment of any region in the world. And the reason, the number of reasons behind that, but one is there's latent demand for any service that we have to offer in Africa. There's latent, not just because people don't have access to that. You can see what happened with the telecom revolution. But also it's that, the business model is actually quite complex because of all the challenges we have on the continent. So the business is quite complex. And to get it right is not easy, but once you get it right, you can literally print money in Africa, as our dear friend Mr. Soka, I'm sure knows here, with Standard Chartered. But let me give an example. I always take the example of MTN in Nigeria, right? So for those of you who don't know MTN is one of the largest mobile operators across Africa and the Middle East. They have 21 operations across the region, 16 in Africa. Nigeria is one of 21 operations. It is the biggest. Now, they have about 7,000 base stations in Nigeria to provide these services. And because of the power issues I mentioned earlier, each base station needs to have a generator, right? And a generator has to run for 24 hours to make sure the base station is operational. So you can only imagine the complexity of getting, these trucks to all the most remote areas in Nigeria to fuel these generators with diesel. And the cost associated with that, right? So diesel is one of the highest costs in the OPEX. But despite that, MTN makes 63% EBITDA margins in Nigeria, right? Nigeria is 20% of the subscribers globally, and 40% of the profits. 40, one country. And there's a reason, right? And you'll have a number of such examples in Nigeria and in other African countries. So at the end of the day, if you get your business model right in Africa, it's harder for your competitors to come in and replicate it, and literally you can make a lot of money.
Next, it was the importance of development and inclusive growth, particularly amongst the younger generation.
Or more, right? 10% of the Fortune 500 companies make $1 billion or more in Africa. Actually, at the World Economic Forum last week in Addis, the CEO of the head of Africa for Diageo was talking about how Diageo has now hit $2 billion in revenue. So I knew Africans like to drink beer. But I was like, $2 billion, right, just in Africa, revenue alone. And then the number of homegrown African companies. Now, what I always say is many of these companies typically tell us as McKinsey that they'd rather we not go out and spread the word about Africa, that they prefer for the competitors to stay out and think about, perceptions of risk for Africa, as the president was talking about, and then not come in the market for themselves. And actually, maybe we should have done that because we, over the last 2 years, have been spreading the word so well that now our main competitors, BCG and Bain, have both established offices in South Africa. So the more the merrier. So at the end of the day, first, things are fundamentally changing. And for me, the second message is that, you can actually make a lot of money, and people are making a lot of money on the continent. Third message is that, for this trend to continue, we actually believe as McKinsey in the work you'll see in the Lines on the Move report that, there are very strong prospects for continuous growth in Africa. But for it to continue, there are a number of issues, and we've talked about infrastructure and education, a number of issues we need to address. But I believe there's one critical one, which is youth unemployment. Right, that is a massive issue that the most critical, I would argue, that we need to address on the continent. So you remember these pictures, right? This was last year. And you look at Tunisia, you look at Libya, you look at Egypt, they actually all grew between 4.5% and 5% in the 2000s, right? So growth was not the problem. But the problem was that there was growth, but there was not a development, right? What we call inclusive growth, right? They were not able to translate that growth into employment opportunities for their people. Now, my take, and there's been a lot of talk about inclusive growth lately, my take on it is actually a nice problem to have, right? 10 years ago, we had no growth, right? So we needed to sort out the growth problem. And if we didn't have growth today, we'll not be talking about inclusive growth. Now we need to address it, and we need to do it urgently. But now that we're growing at 5 to 6% as a continent, we have multiple countries growing at double digits, we absolutely need to address the inclusive growth issue. Now, to give you a sense for the magnitude of the problem, and it is a big problem, if you look at official numbers from the International Labour Organization, ILO, the official unemployment number in Africa is 9%, right? So you said the US is at 8.5%, but what's the big deal, right? 9% official number is not that bad. However, if you look at the stable jobs, only about 28% of Africans are in stable jobs, right? The jobs that we typically think about. So the big problem is the 63% vulnerable employment. So these are hawkers, these are the subsistence farmers, these are people who, are making a living, but they are in the way struggling to make a living, but nothing in a sustainable basis. And that is something that we urgently need to address on the continent. Now, there's good news, right? The good news is that vulnerable employment is falling, right? The trend is good, it's falling. The bad news is that it's not fast enough, right? Vulnerable employment today is falling at 0.4% per year, right? And if you project that trend, it will take us 50 years to get to East Asia levels of vulnerable employment, which is not very high, by the way, and 100 years to get to the Latin America levels of vulnerable employment, right? So if you just continue as we are today, it'll take forever for us to get there. Now, we spent, as McKinsey, the last 6 months looking at this problem because as a firm, we like to try to address the most complex and most difficult problems, both on the private sector side, and social sector. And we think this is the biggest problem Africa faces. So we've had a team, at our cost, and that's the next report we're coming out with, looking at, the youth unemployment problem in Africa and what needs to be done to close the gap. We've studied it in detail, and we've actually then tried to study what other countries have done, and if we then apply that to Africa, what that could mean for us. So if we diligently apply what, you look at Brazil, look at South Korea, look at Malaysia, a number of countries have been able to increase stable employment very quickly. We will be able to actually cut that timing by half. So we'll get to the East Asia levels in 25 years, we'll get to the Latin America levels in 50 years. But that's still not enough, right? Absolutely not enough. But we can learn from these countries. I wouldn't get, if I had 50 minutes, I could have gone into the details of what needs to be done. But no, I'm kidding. But the report is coming in a couple of weeks. I'll urge you to look out for the report. But it's really going to come with very practical and concrete ideas, and we're hoping to actually do a pilot with some governments, concrete ideas that they can address, that they can implement to address this problem. One of it the president talked about is the whole vocational training issue, right, which is a massive, massive issue.
He finally talked about the unique opportunity and a duty to play a role in the development of the continent.
So, so third message is that, there's a critical problem in addition to all the infrastructure and corruption and education, but the most critical one in my mind is youth unemployment. We have a big gap to close. But hopefully, and we're coming up with some ideas. But more importantly, I think it's very, very top of mind for most of the governments I serve today. Right? South Africa is trying to create 5 million jobs. Nigeria is trying to create a couple million jobs as well. So it's top of mind for them. So third message: we need to really address youth unemployment.
In between was the opportunity for mingling. A number of other speakers addressed the delegates, including Kofi Morna, the non-executive director for Aqueous Platinum. And finally, Dambisa Moyo, author of the New York Times bestseller Dead Aid, on why aid to Africa is not working and how there is a better way. She mesmerized the audience with key facts and figures to be exposed in her forthcoming work. The day was broken up with a number of panel discussions. Kicking off the sessions was a discussion around African trailblazers exploring 21st century leadership. Rosalind Kenya, Vice President of External Affairs and Corporate Social Responsibility at Tullow Oil, talked about the importance of a leader having a vision.
We all know that a leader has to have a vision. And I think it's very important that when we talk about a vision, we're not just talking about any old dream. You often hear people saying, I'm a visionary, so therefore I don't need to manage, or I don't need to, bother about the detail. Well, I think then maybe you're just a dreamer. I think if you're a true leader, yes, you do have a vision, but you also need to have a strategy, a plan about, at least some idea of a plan about how you execute that vision.
She was joined by other key speakers, including Modesta Lillian Mahiga, who talked about the importance of being competitive, and Terry Rhodes of Eaton Towers, who touched on setting up businesses in Africa.
Having gone to our own schools, but learning the skills, you could be very well educated and not a great entrepreneur. Learning the skills that are transferable in the world of work.
If you centralise leadership, it can go either way. I prefer a team approach. Modest mentioned it. I think the best entrepreneurial startups in any country are by complementary teams. So that you've got some different views, some balances and checks and so on. I also, from my experience, if you want to grow a big company, you have to know how big companies work, and preferably how they don't work, and you fall out of them, and then you set up your own company, and you know what the good bits are and what the bad bits are. Some of the processes and disciplines are necessary, but a lot of them are restrictive. And finally, in the African context, I've always attempted to break through the channels of nationalism, tribalism, nepotism, self-selection, and do it all just on merit. Deliberately mix and match, deliberately take Tanzanians and get them to run businesses in Ghana and not in Tanzania. Because I served a writ on the government minister in Tanzania. I didn't know what I was going to get out of the country that night. I didn't know whether I'd be persona non grata, but it was more important for me that the business worked, and it actually didn't matter to me if I was never allowed back in Tanzania, because there was 53 other countries I could go to. It would matter to you. So being able to have that discipline of doing things the right way in business means detaching yourself from the roots, if you like, spread yourself across the opportunity.
The wider discussion of trade and not aid was debated looking at growth through economic partnership, chaired by Anne Verversi, editor of African Business, and joined by a number of guests including Simon Liang, CEO of Evergreen Industries Group, Fabrice Enzi-Bekale, and George Ajan, political consultant and strategist looking at trade versus aid.
We've picked apart a little bit of the African growth story and seen the role of trade, and actually how we have seen this growth in EM trade, but actually the structure has remained the same. And finally, back to us, we know the solutions. What are we doing about it, and what can we do about it?
As a political analyst from the donor country, one is as a political advisor in the recipient country, and then the third is as a private investor and entrepreneur who's taken the decision to take private capital on a very small scale relative to a lot of things we hear about at this conference from the United States to Africa. So I was speaking to a colleague of mine, another political writer, political analyst, and I said, I'm just going to London to speak at this conference, and the topic of my panel is trade versus aid. He said, well, that's pretty boring. I mean, that's been decided 40 years ago. Aid doesn't work. Aid just leads to more corruption, and it should be done away with.
And I think the key question is not about whether trade is better than aid, but how can we improve trade so that it benefits sustainably not only the country but the population as well.
Tokumbo Ishmael, Managing Director of Alithia Capital, Nigeria, talked about working closely with large corporates already established in the country for greater success.
A factor that's going to enable it to scale than many. There's actually a group of cook stove entrepreneurs across the world. It's quite interesting, and the project we're working on is being seen as one that has the opportunity to scale significantly more than others. And the key factor there is actually being able to work with a large corporate who has innovated internally, so kind of like corporate venturing, and where we have been able to leverage all the marketing and the distribution and all the understanding of the African consumers. So I just wanted to say that just even in terms of large corporates innovating, that has been a huge factor.
So Africa Day 2012 drew to a successful close with a quick peek behind the scenes at the individuals that enabled the day to run so well.
It was nerve-wracking when it first started, but I think as the day got underway, I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, I was really happy about the day. It started a bit, I would say scary when we had the president walk here 1 hour earlier. So we were sort of, running between here and the Dean House, and it was great. I think everybody really enjoyed it. Already received really good feedback. So.
And what do you think are the most significant points that came out of today?
That we can just continue to push boundaries, and that we need to innovate for every conference, because it's not about trying to replicate success today. It's about trying to do what's relevant next year, whatever is in the air, what is happening in the news, whatever is relevant for the time. I think that's what the key message is.
I think also what's important is we've got to realise that a lot of people that come to the conferences are people that we've had at our conferences before. So if they come to the same conference over and over again, it's easy for them to get jaded. But when the same people keep giving the same positive feedback and saying, wow, you've surpassed my expectations, or you guys did things a little differently this year and it worked, then it says to us that in order to keep delivering excellence, we've got to continue innovating.
Can you just summarise really the importance of the African Club and what it really means?
Okay, so I think the importance is, you can go to any conference, you can go to a private equity conference, you can go to a marketing conference, but this actually brings people from different sectors together. We just saw a lady who was a playwright. So this is almost like a hub, to a certain, I don't know, over exaggerated, but it almost feels like a hub for these Africa-related professionals. In terms of the school, it's important to raise the profiles just so that even if somebody wants to come and study here and have nothing to do with the club, at least they have the support, either the advisory support from us who've been through the program, or even financial support through the scholarship. So it's not just about the conference actually, it's more about just, being able to offer support to the wider.
Yeah, I think the club is actually also very important, just from external and external people, and also the vision that people have in just African-run organizations. I think that being able to throw a conference like this, an organization that took us about 9 months, where we have about 95% of people that are external professionals that are not actually students, I think that shows as well, first, how the school is committed to diversity, and second, that we as African actually want things to change, and that we put the effort to make things change, and we want the world to know that.
And very lastly, Dr. did say when she was on stage that this whole PR engine, which has been changing the mindsets of people all around the world on their perceptions on Africa, that Africans now have to take responsibility for that. What's your response to that?
I absolutely think she's right. She gave concrete examples. There are more poor people in India than there are in Africa. There are more people in China. So at the end of the day, if the world hasn't got it right, and the only ones who know the truth are Africans, then it's our responsibility, it's our obligation to say, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about, you're absolutely wrong, that's the media sensation. Don't carry on as an authority until you've actually earned some authority, and you have your own authority. You go to Africa, you work, you go there, you see what it's like. And so I'm really glad you made that remark, and I hope people will take that sort of attitude away, that it's our responsibility to tell people the truth, to paint the right image.
Lots of lessons to be learnt by all. It seems Africa Day 2013 will be an even greater success.